Hey everyone, it's Kristen Jenson with Protect Young Minds. And today I am so happy to welcome Dr. Christy Kane. She has been with us before speaking about the addictive nature of electronics and digital devices. Dr. Christy Kane is a licensed mental health clinician. She's a business leader and a mother who believes in empowering people through positive mental health. And I have learned from Christy that, mental health is who we are. It's not just, somebody's depression. It's all of us. It's who we are. And it includes questions about sexuality. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how children need good information about sex in order for them to navigate their way through a hypersexualized world and how they're impacted by that. But welcome, Christy. Thank you so much. And just fill in the blanks if I didn't say a few things about you that you want our audience to know, what you're working on, what's your latest research, and what you do to help so many people understand the value of mental health efforts in just making people's lives better.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be back. And let's see, what am I busy doing? My corporation is working on micro learning modules for the empowerment of families, educators, youth, and communities. So that's our big push right now. We're visiting with various entities about how we stabilize mental health. We have to switch from triage. Our society is so good at intervention and triage. When there's a crisis, we send resources, right? But we're not very good at preventative. And so we're really working from the preventative perspective and helping kids and families and communities in the field of mental health. The other exciting thing is I do have a book being published. I suppose I can say that. There will be a book coming out in July. And I think the title is going to be Fractured Souls and Splintered Memories, Overcoming the Impact of Trauma. And so I'm excited for it to come out. It's a story of an individual and the journey that they took to heal, to overcome trauma they experienced in their life. So that's fun. So I do have a book being published in July. And this is a great topic.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're covering this topic, because from my field as a mental health professional and setting in my clinic, I'll give you just a snapshot. In the last 2 weeks, I've probably had, I'd say about 10 teenagers come into my office as new clients, and they present with anxiety or depression, right? And as we begin our conversations, it comes down to sexuality, gender orientation, and being able to talk about and ask questions. And what I find so concerning is that as I visit with these young people, one of the biggest questions I ask them is, have you been able to have conversation with your parents or with a legal guardian or whoever is, in their lives? And it's really interesting because I get the answer, no, they don't want to talk. And we have to somehow break down that barrier, because as you know, the world is more than willing to display sexuality and more than willing to imply or to suggest that someone is of a certain gender orientation. And we also know that there's a lot of evidence-based research to show that there's different gender orientations, and none of that is a negative. But if we don't start having conversations with our kids, being more open around sexuality, we're going to continue to have a young population, and teenage suicide is the second leading cause of death, right, for our teenagers. Yeah. We're going to continue to have young people afraid to discuss important conversations that they're translating into anxiety and depression. And then, unfortunately, when they feel like there isn't perhaps any resources or any way to have conversations, and we end up with suicide ideation. And so I'm glad you're talking about this, and what can parents do in this particular area?
Yeah. So important. And I know it can be uncomfortable for parents. Many of us were not given a great example of how to talk to, we were not, our parents didn't talk to us
Right.
about, sex. And so we don't know how to talk to our kids and whatever. And we have several articles on Protect Young Minds about books that we have vetted and other resources uh, about, how to talk to children about sex and the things that they should know by like around 7 years of age. But there are many conversations. You mentioned about how kids are just showing up depressed and anxious, and they don't have really anyone to talk to about these topics. We did some research a few years back, and in fact, I'm just working on publishing a paper that is describing that research project, which was basically a qualitative study with 10 people who identified themselves as addicted to porn or recovering from an addiction to pornography. And they had lots of different reasons why they used pornography, why they hired pornography to do a job for them, is how we frame it. But the one thing every single one of them, all 10 of them had in common was that no one had any meaningful conversations about sex when they were young. And so, given the digital world and how easy it is to access information, they just, went to their friends. They went to, went online. They found pornography. And so they didn't have the support that they needed to really thrive in this hypersexualized world, to thrive with a healthy sense of what sexuality can be. So, and then they get, influenced by the toxic notions and ideas and violent things that they see in porn. So let's just start tackling this. So what do kids need most from their parents in order to navigate the current world that we find ourselves in?
Well, I think parents need to be more mindful and connected than ever before. It's interesting. You said perhaps you grew up in a generation and I grew up in a generation where sex wasn't necessarily talked about, right? Or it was the talk, right? And by the time parents had that talk with us, we already knew everything anyways, right? Parents today have to create an open door platform so that those conversations can come into play. I've had many moms visit with me about 7 or 8-year-olds who have been viewing stuff online and scared to tell their mom or their dad. And so we've got to be able to remove shame, first of all, around the topic of sex. It's interesting how in previous generations, sex was bad, right? They kind of came together in that. And yet sex is a beautiful and amazing part of life. And we have to start helping our children understand that. Kids who believe there's a secret will go searching for the secret, right? So at Christmas time, if you've hid the Christmas presents, trust me, kids are going through the house knowing that they're going to find the Christmas presents. We have to stop making sex a secret. We need to be talking about it openly, and we need to be able to talk about it frankly. I have a good friend of mine who spends a lot of time with young men, and he's just the type of person that the guys feel very comfortable with him. And sometimes he shares with me the questions that these young men ask him that they won't ask their dads, but they'll ask him. And he just handles it and he answers it. And they're very interesting questions that really the parents should be answering. And so I think that first thing is, first of all, parents has to be comfortable with their sexuality, right? Some of the biggest barriers is adults don't even know how to talk about sex in their own marriage, in their own relationships, in their own home. So parents have to get comfortable with sex and realize it's not bad or taboo or something you keep behind closed doors. And then second of all, constantly creating open communication. I mean, it shouldn't be the talk. It should be a talk all the time. Hey, what are kids saying at school about sex? Or do you have any questions? Or what are you learning? Or what are you hearing about sexual orientation? And have you ever questioned your own? Would you like to talk about that? There's so many questions that parents can ask kids if they keep the shame out of the room. that will allow for
Yeah.
open, honest communication.
I think a lot of parents would be afraid to ask that question about sexual orientation only because they would think that that would promote some view of it, positive, negative, whatever. But I do believe that asking it then gives you the opportunity to talk, because if they are questioning, I mean, talking about it is not going to change anything other than you can give them better, maybe good information. So if a parent is wanting, we had someone write in and say, she was married. She said, but I don't enjoy sex and I don't have a good experience with it, but I don't want to pass this on to my kids. So what do I do? And so we had a therapist, write an answer for that. And that's a great article. So what do parents do that if they can't even talk about sex openly with their partner, then how do they start getting comfortable enough to talk to their kids? Or is that an absolute prerequisite? I mean, do you have to be 100% comfortable to begin these conversations?
No. And the wonderful thing is kids allow us to make mistakes, right? They're very forgiving and it's trial and error. If you're not comfortable with your own sexuality and your intimacy within your relationship, I think you need to talk to a mental health professional, because that's a very important part of marriage. If you look at the statistics, number one and number two reasons why divorces come about have to do with finances in the bedroom, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be very important if that's something that you're struggling with. And to that person's credit, a lot of the older generations grew up with sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, right? And then the honeymoon night, sex is everything.
And they turn it.
Yeah, they can't make that. They can't make that shift. And so I'd recommend talking with a mental health professional. And then no, you don't have to be perfect. And you can explain to your children that sex is something that is amazing and wonderful, and you learn with your partner, right? I remember listening to different couples when I was growing up talk about how their sexual relationship was a learning curve, right? And the first time around didn't go so well, and they laughed and it was funny, but they worked at it together. And so parents just need to be able to have all those type of conversations with kids. Now, go back to your point on discussing sexual orientation, gender identity. Talking about it is the most important thing that we can do, because trust me, the world is talking about it. The lockers at school are talking about it. And one of the difficulties is if a kid begins to question, there are many groups that are going to help them identify, but that identification may not be accurate. So it's really important that the parents are having those conversations, and that they're there to support that child as they go through that journey. Because sexual exploration is a normal process of maturation, right? And we need to be able to have open conversations with that, because someone who might be questioning as they explore and they feel supported, they may think that they were headed one direction and then discover they're really headed the other. But if they find that they're surrounded by peer pressure or certain cultures, that may not be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard of one woman who said that she used to have dreams, or she had a dream one time, and it was, and it made her think that maybe she had lesbian, whatever. But then she talked to a psychologist, just who is a friend, and they said, no, don't worry about that. That's not actually an indication. That is just your brain trying to process. And she gave me, some other things to tell my friend that, just nip that worry in the bud, really. That people, and I've heard of kids. So I've heard of kids that maybe they are sexually abused or by someone of the same gender, and they have an arousal experience, and then they feel like, well, I must be, gay or lesbian, or they watch, lesbian or gay porn, and they say, oh, I was aroused by that, I must be this. And if we are talking with our children about this, we can disabuse some of those notions that sex. And I think really there is a lot of learning because sex is such a, um, I mean, it's on a spectrum in a sense, it's very individual. And, but I worry for the kids that watch, especially gay porn, that they are being, you know, maybe they're being convinced of an orientation that may not be actually what they're truly um, experiencing or what is who they are. So do you
So you're
have any
accurate.
thoughts on that? I'm
Yes.
trying to think like how to because I think kids
Yeah.
take things so seriously and they
Well,
have fears,
right.
right?
And you're accurate in the sense that oftentimes the first sexual experience may sometimes begin to create their own identification, even though it may be inaccurate, right? And so, what we know is that it's critical to explain the biology of arousal to children so that they understand if there's any type of friction stimulation, whether it's by a female or a male, there's going to be a response, whether you're male or female. And so those are some of those important conversations, especially going back to what you said about, gay pornography. You might have a heterosexual youth respond to a gay video and then begin to question, when in reality, optical stimulation is as powerful as physical stimulation, right? And it's the sexual act more than it is the identity of the individuals in the video. And so those need to be conversations that parents are having with children. You are accurate that oftentimes kids who are abused, especially if the abuser was the same gender, they'll sometimes question their own sexuality. And that will be part of that healing process, is to help them understand that regardless of the gender of the abuser, that they did nothing wrong. And there is going to be a response if there is stimulation. I mean, we're biologically wired that way. And I think it's important that parents have frank conversations like, what's the difference between sex and making love? They're not the same, And so they need to be able to have all of those conversations so that as children are watching movies, I mean, movies do the biggest disservice of all to the intimate bedroom of a couple, because what's portrayed on the screen most of the time is not accurate to real life events. But if no one's having conversations with children, then they grow up with expectations are not realistic, right? And so it's a broad spectrum, you're right, of sexuality, but then it's a broad spectrum of daily, weekly conversations with our children with no shame. If our kids sense that we're embarrassed about the conversation, they're not going to come ask us. But if they sense like, hey, come on, ask me. If I don't know the answer, I'll go look it up. Then we have a better chance that the children will come to us.
And if you are embarrassed, you can just admit it and say, look, yeah, this is a little hard for mom. I admit it, but hey, we need to do this. And I want to do this because I want to be there for you. Mm-hmm. So I think, like you said, kids are forgiving. And I think when you come at it that way, they'll understand. So,
well, and do we want the world giving them the message, or do they want,
right,
or do we want to give them the message, right?
Right. And when you're talking about, making love versus sex, I mean, there's the act and then there's the purpose of it. And I often, when I speak and when we have an article about, the difference between the sex that's portrayed in porn and the healthy sex that is going to be, creating an intimate relationship and a strong marriage. So they're pretty much polar opposites. And that really needs to be clear in the minds of the kids for sure. Okay, so how do healthy conversations about sex impact one way or another a child's curiosity to look at pornography? So if you start the conversation about sex at a young age, are parents worried? I mean, what's your, as a professional, as a clinician, what do you see? What's the best way to kind of tamp down that curiosity about pornography?
Well, I'm going to go back to the fact that curiosity is increased when there isn't conversations. When we have healthy, age appropriate conversations, we mitigate that curiosity of secrecy. When children feel like their parents are willing to talk about it and parents are willing to be open and age appropriate, it diminishes the desire of the kids to go look for it elsewhere. We find in the usage of pornography, sometimes it's accidental, they stumble upon it. Sometimes they deliberately go looking for it. Sometimes it can be curiosity because they've heard something at school. If the gatekeeper is the parent having the open, frank conversations about it, then that curiosity is going to be directed more towards the parent. Hey, mom, I heard this, or hey, mom, have you heard about this? And let me go see what I can find on the internet.
Right. We always advise parents to teach their children that if they hear any kind of slang words that they don't understand, to come and ask them and don't Google it. Because there's a lot of sexual slang that kids are going to hear, and they, no kid wants to be the one that doesn't understand what's going on. So,
and when you talk about that, there's something also parents need to recognize is today's youth are growing up not trusting the world, because you can prove and disprove anything on the internet. So parents have got to start to have frank conversations about that internet, and that there's stuff out there that isn't accurate, that's portrayed to be accurate. There's political cadences designed to turn them away from that perspective of the family and the support system and all kinds of things. And so parents need to begin discussing. I mean, I recommend everybody watches The Social Dilemma, right?
Yeah.
But parents have got to start explaining that Google is not God. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but what it's done for our youth, if you look at some of the research, is they don't know what to believe. And so they tend to trust less, and they don't have that same belief system as the generations of the past. And so that's all going to be impacted by parents having honest, truthful, frank conversation about what's out there on the internet, not just pornography, and then guiding them to truth and values and principles and things that really do bring about positive mental health and positive sexuality within their lives at the right time with the right person.
Yeah. Well, that is great. I think you have answered a lot of questions that our parents in the audience will be having about how to talk to kids about sex, how to talk and when. And I think that the other thing I would just point out, and you can comment on this, but I have talked to parents, and we just got an email recently from a parent who was going through a course that was helping her talk to her child about pornography. About sex. Mm-hmm. But she made it, and so they were very comfortable talking about these, about sex. And turns out that child was on a game, and somebody started talking to him about sex. Well, he felt pretty comfortable, and so he started talking to this person that was grooming him, basically, about sex. Mm-hmm. So at the same time that you start those conversations about sex, you want them to be open with you. It may also be important to teach that these kinds of conversations are with parents or trusted adults and not with others, that there could be a real downside to that. Mm-hmm. And B, make sure that when you're starting that conversation about pornography, and you can weigh in on this, make sure when you're starting that conversation about sex that you also talk about its counterfeit, which is pornography. And because I've also heard of kids, they learn about sex, they want to know more, and they do what they see their parents do. They go online and search, and then they're into pornography. So just so important that we are mindful. Any last comments on that, Dr. Kane?
I agree with you completely. In that conversation of talking about healthy sexuality is to also talk about channels, right? We have these conversations with people that we trust, because we know that they're going to get the right answers. And that goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is keep the door open so your children come to you. Because you're right, the world's going to offer a smorgasbord of information, but that's not where we want them to go. But if we haven't established those good, open, honest conversations about all kinds of topics, we run the risk that our children are going to go someplace else. So foundationally, talking about healthy sexuality comes down to the relationship you have with your child. They know that you're there, that you support them, you love them, they can trust you, and that you're going to give them the right information. And then you always offer counter counsel. Don't go to these areas because they're not accurate. And if the child happens to go to those areas, then we don't respond with shame or blame, but with love and understanding and counter directions.
That sounds like very good advice. So thank you so much, Dr. Christy Kane, for taking some time. I know you got to get right back to work helping people. So thank you for helping us understand a little bit more about the role of, having these conversations about sex and protecting children from problems and negative mental health issues around sexuality as well as pornography. So thank you so much.
And people can go to my website if they want to ask any further questions.
Yes.
Or whatever, just let them know that I'm happy to respond.
So tell us your website.
360 focusmentalhealth.com.
360 Focus Health.
Focus
360 focusmentalhealth.com.
Correct.
Or you can just look up Dr. Christy Kane and you'll find it as well.
Yes, you will. Yep, that's correct. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.